I paid for my daughter's engagement party, but right in the middle of the celebration, she walked up to me and said, "I invited you here to serve the guests and clean up, not to have fun." I withdrew and left, accidentally leaving my cell phone recording on the living room shelf, when I pressed play to listen to it 2 days later. My God, the terror. From what I heard, I had only 10 minutes left to save my life. But let me tell you from the beginning, because you need to understand how a 68-year-old mother reaches the point of fleeing her own daughter's party with a broken heart, unaware that that forgotten cell phone would end up being the only reason I am still breathing. It all started 3 months earlier, when Harper showed up at my house with that calculating smile I knew so well. She had Julian on her arm, her boyfriend of 2 years, a man in an impeccable suit with smooth words who never quite convinced me. There was something in his eyes that unsettled me, a coldness he hid behind those perfect teeth and practiced manners. "Mom, we have wonderful news," Harper announced, extending her left hand to show me a diamond ring that shone with obscene arrogance. Julian proposed. "We're getting married in 6 months. I should have seen the signs. I should have noticed there was no real emotion in her voice, only that note of triumph that always appeared when she got something she wanted. But I, being the foolish, hopeful mother that I was, only saw an opportunity to get closer to my daughter, to be part of her life, to show her that despite all our years of distance and coldness, I was still her mother and would always be there for her." "What happiness, my love," I told her, hugging her with tears in my eyes. She returned the hug stiffly, as if my affection made her uncomfortable. Julian watched us from the sofa with that smile that never reached his eyes. "We want to throw an engagement party before the wedding," Harper continued, pulling away from my hug faster than necessary. "Something elegant, with all our friends and family. At my house, of course. It has the perfect space to host guests." "Sounds beautiful," I replied, never imagining what would come next. Harper exchanged a look with Julian. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. It is the silent language between two people who share secrets no one else should know. "The thing is, Mom, with the expenses of the wedding and the honeymoon to Europe that Julian wants to gift me, we don't have the budget for the engagement party, but we thought that maybe you." She left the sentence hanging in the air, like a hook waiting for me to bite, and I bit. Of course, I bit. "I will take care of it," I said without thinking twice. "I want to do this for you, Harper, for both of you." The smile that appeared on my daughter's face had nothing warm about it. It was the smile of someone who had just gotten exactly what they wanted. Julian nodded with approval, as if I had passed some kind of test. "That would be wonderful, Mom. I knew we could count on you." Over the following weeks, Harper sent me endless lists of requirements. The catering had to be from a specific high-end bistro, no homemade food or budget solutions. The flowers had to be imported, exotic varieties that cost a fortune. She insisted on hiring a live band, not a simple DJ. Every detail she chose was more expensive than the last, and I swallowed my worry and nodded, because I wanted my daughter to have the best. I sold the jewelry my late husband Arthur had given me throughout our 40 years of marriage. The pearl necklace from our silver anniversary, the diamond earrings he gave me when Harper was born, the antique watch that belonged to his grandfather. Every piece carried a story, a memory, a piece of the life we built together. But Arthur had died 5 years ago, and those jewels were kept in a box, gathering dust and nostalgia. At least this way, I thought, they would have a purpose. They would bring happiness to our daughter. How stupid I was to believe Harper would value that sacrifice. The day of the party arrived with a clear sky and a gentle breeze that made the white curtains dance in the windows of Harper's house. I arrived early, as she had asked me, dressed in the best outfit I had in my closet, a cream-colored dress that Arthur always said made me look elegant. I had gotten my hair done at the salon, something I rarely did because my Social Security check barely covered basic expenses. But that day was special. That day, for once, I wanted to feel like part of my daughter's life. When I entered the house, Harper was yelling at the catering staff because they had placed the tables 3 inches from where she wanted them. Julian was on the phone, speaking in a low voice in a corner, with a furrowed brow that indicated something was worrying him. Neither of them greeted me when I arrived. "Mom, finally," Harper said when she saw me, as if I had arrived late despite being 30 minutes ahead of the agreed time. I need you to help with the flowers. The florist left them in boxes, and someone has to arrange them in the vases. There was no thank you for making all this possible. There was no "you look beautiful, Mom." Only orders and that impatient tone she used when speaking to service staff. I spent the next 2 hours arranging flowers, setting up chairs, verifying that every detail was perfect. My feet ached in those dress shoes I hadn't worn since Arthur's funeral. My back protested every time I bent down to pick something up from the floor. But I kept working, because that is what mothers do. We work in silence, with love, hoping that somehow that love is recognized. The guests started arriving around 6 in the evening. Men in expensive suits and women in designer dresses filled the living room and the backyard. Everyone brought gifts wrapped in shiny paper and perfectly practiced smiles. Harper floated among them like a queen receiving tributes, with Julian always by her side, his hand possessively on her waist. I tried to mingle with the guests, introducing myself as the mother of the bride-to-be. Some were polite. Others looked at me with that cold courtesy people reserve for those they consider insignificant. I heard snippets of conversations about trips to the Hamptons, stock market investments, beach properties in Florida, a world completely foreign to mine, where my monthly income of $1,200 seemed like a cruel joke. I took a glass of champagne from a passing tray. It was the first time I had tasted champagne in years. The bubbly liquid tickled my nose and made me feel, for a moment, as if I too belonged to this world of luxury and celebration that my money had created, but of which I was not a part. It was then that Harper separated from the group of friends she was laughing with and headed toward me. Her face showed that expression I knew so well, the one she used when she was about to say something hurtful but wanted it to look casual, almost accidental. She leaned toward me, so close I could smell her expensive perfume. Her voice was low, barely a whisper, but every word fell on me like a cold stone. I invited you to serve the guests and do the cleanup, not to enjoy yourself. Put down that glass and put on the apron I left in the kitchen. The guests need more appetizers, and the dirty plates need to be cleared from the patio. I stood paralyzed. The champagne turned bitter in my mouth. Around us, people kept laughing, conversing, oblivious to the knife my daughter had just plunged into my heart. I looked into her eyes, searching for some trace of humanity, some sign that she was joking, that she couldn't be speaking seriously. But her eyes were cold, dead. She looked at me the way one looks at an incompetent employee who needs to be put in their place. "Harper, I am your mother," I managed to whisper, my voice breaking. "I paid for all of this." "Exactly. You paid. That was your role. Now fulfill the other one," she cut in, straightening up and smoothing her dress as if our conversation were a simple inconvenience in her perfect night. "And please, stay in the kitchen and out of sight. My friends don't need to know that my mother is a simple retiree who has nothing interesting to contribute to their conversations." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing there with that glass of champagne trembling in my hand and tears burning in my eyes, fighting not to fall. I did not cry. Not in that moment. I would not give them that satisfaction. I left the champagne glass on the nearest table and walked toward the kitchen with my head held high. Although every step cost me a monumental effort, I could feel the eyes of some guests following me, those looks full of pity or morbid curiosity from those who had witnessed my humiliation and were secretly glad it wasn't theirs. The kitchen was empty. The caterers had gone out to serve more drinks and appetizers. On the marble island, I found the apron Harper had mentioned, folded with that sickening precision she applied to everything in her life. It was a simple, gray apron, the kind housekeepers wear. I took it in my trembling hands, and something inside me broke definitively. 42 years. 42 years since I gave birth to that girl. I carried her in my arms. I fed her. I watched over her nights of fever. I sacrificed my dreams so she could have hers. I worked double shifts when Arthur fell ill so she could stay in that expensive university she had chosen. And now, at the party I paid for with the last things of value I had left, she treated me like disposable trash. I did not put on the apron. Instead, I let it fall onto the impeccable kitchen floor. My hands were no longer trembling. They were still, cold, determined. Something had gone out inside me in that moment, like a candle finally yielding to the wind. I left the kitchen through the back door, the one that led to the small side yard of the house. I did not want to cross through the living room full of guests again. I did not want to see the looks of pity, nor hear more laughter that now sounded like mockery to me. I went around the house until I reached where I had parked my old car, that sedan from 2003 that I kept alive with miraculous repairs and the help of Jack, the neighborhood mechanic who charged me fair prices because he had been a friend of Arthur. It was then that I remembered I had left my cell phone inside the house. I had been using it before the guests arrived, recording a video of the decorations. I wanted to have a memory of how everything had turned out, of that moment when I thought my relationship with Harper would finally improve. What irony. I had left the phone recording on the shelf in the living room, next to that crystal vase that cost $300 and that Harper insisted on buying because it gave the perfect touch of elegance. I thought about going back to get it. My phone was old, but it was the only thing I had to communicate with the outside world. However, the mere idea of entering that house again, of seeing my daughter's face, of risking another public slight, was unbearable to me. The phone could wait. I needed to get out of there immediately, before the pain I was holding back exploded in front of all those strangers. I got into my car and drove back to my small apartment on the other side of the city, that modest, two-bedroom place that had been my refuge since Arthur died. The tears finally began to fall when I left behind the exclusive neighborhood where Harper lived, that neighborhood of enormous houses and perfect lawns that I could never afford. I cried for the mother I had been and for the daughter I would never have. I cried for Arthur, who was not there to hold me and tell me that everything would be okay. I cried for the sold jewels, for the broken dreams, for the 42 years of unconditional love thrown into the trash like that gray apron I left lying on her kitchen floor. When I arrived at my apartment, it was almost 10 o'clock at night. I took off that cream-colored dress that I would never wear again and shoved it to the back of the closet where I wouldn't have to see it ever again. I put on my old nightgown and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, feeling how the weight of the betrayal sank me deeper and deeper into the mattress. I didn't eat anything that night nor the next day. The pain had replaced hunger. I stayed in bed most of the time, ignoring the 3 calls I received on the landline. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to explain why I had fled the party like a thief in the night. I didn't want to hear advice on how families must stay together or to give your daughter another chance. The second day after the party, my sister Patty appeared at my door. I hadn't answered her messages or her calls, and she, with that loving persistence that had always characterized her, decided to come personally to verify that I was still alive. "Eleanor, open this door right now, or I will call the building manager," she shouted from the hallway. Her voice had that mix of worry and determination that admitted no refusals. I opened the door, dragging my feet, conscious of my pitiful appearance. I hadn't bathed, my hair was a disaster, and I probably smelled of accumulated sadness. Patty entered like a gale, carrying bags of food and an expression on her face that oscillated between relief and fury. "What the hell happened at that party?" she asked, dropping the bags on the small dining table and turning to face me. "Harper called me hysterical, saying you left without saying goodbye, that you left everything lying around and embarrassed her in front of her guests. But I know you, sister. You wouldn't do something like that without a very powerful reason." I crumbled. I told her everything. Every hurtful word, every contemptuous look, every moment of humiliation I had endured, not only that night, but during years of trying to earn the affection of a daughter who seemed incapable of feeling anything but disdain for me. Patty listened to me in silence, her face becoming increasingly serious, her hands clenching until her knuckles turned white. "That girl is rotten on the inside," she said finally, with a controlled rage I had rarely seen in her. "And you need to stay away from her. Eleanor, you need to protect yourself. She is my daughter," I whispered, although the words no longer had the weight they used to. "She is all I have left of Arthur." "Arthur would be rolling in his grave if he knew how his daughter treats you," Patty responded harshly. "And you know it. He never would have allowed this." She was right. Arthur had been a gentle but firm man. If he had seen Harper treat me that way, he would have intervened immediately. But Arthur had been 6 feet under for 5 years, and I had been alone, navigating this toxic relationship without his guidance or support. "By the way," Patty said as she began to take food out of the bags, determined to feed me whether I wanted to or not, "you left your phone at Harper's house." She mentioned it when she called, She said to pick it up whenever you wanted, although by her tone it seemed more like an order than an invitation. My phone. I had forgotten it completely in the midst of the emotional trauma. Suddenly it seemed very important to get it back, not for the device itself, which was old and basic, but because the idea of Harper having something of mine, anything that connected me to her, was intolerable. I will go get it this afternoon, I said, feeling a new determination begin to grow inside me. It wasn't rage, not exactly. It was something colder, more definitive. It was the moment when a mother finally understands that she must protect herself from her own daughter. Patty insisted on accompanying me, but I told her I needed to do this alone. I needed to face Harper one last time, get my phone back, and close that chapter of my life permanently. My sister wasn't convinced, but she finally accepted, making me promise that I would call her as soon as I left there. I showered, dressed in comfortable clothes, and drove again toward Harper's neighborhood. It was mid-afternoon, and the sun shone with an almost cruel intensity, as if mocking the darkness I felt inside. The drive seemed longer than ever. Every red light was an opportunity to turn around and forget about the damn phone. But I kept going. I needed that closure. When I arrived in front of Harper's house, the yard still showed traces of the party. Some chairs were stacked in a corner, waiting for the rental company to pick them up. The grass had marks where the tents had been. Everything seemed sad and desolate under the sunlight, as if the house itself was ashamed of what had happened within its walls. I rang the doorbell and waited, my heart beating with a mix of anxiety and determination. There was no answer. I rang again. Silence. I tried turning the door handle and, to my surprise, it gave way. The door was unlocked. Harper had that dangerous habit of leaving the house unlocked when she was in the backyard or upstairs. I had tried to warn her many times about the risks, but she always ignored me with that gesture of annoyance she reserved especially for my maternal advice. "Harper?" I called from the entrance, my voice echoing in the empty foyer. "It's me. I came for my phone." No one answered. The house was silent, that type of heavy silence that makes every small noise amplify in a disturbing way. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the ticking of the pendulum clock in the living room. Nothing else. I entered and closed the door behind me. The living room still showed signs of the party. Some forgotten glasses on the tables, crumpled napkins, the residual smell of mixed perfumes and expensive food. I headed directly to the shelf where I had left my phone, next to the crystal vase that had cost so much. There it was, exactly where I had left it. I picked it up and saw that the battery was almost dead, but it still had some charge. The screen showed the camera application open, frozen on the last frame it had captured before I left it there. I realized with horror that the phone had kept recording. For 2 full days, that stubborn old device had remained on, capturing who knows how many hours of nothing, probably. Or perhaps sounds of Harper cleaning up after the party, inconsequential phone conversations, the noise of the television. I pressed the button to stop the recording, and the phone almost died from lack of battery. I was about to leave when I heard voices coming from the backyard. I froze, immediately recognizing Harper's voice. She was talking to someone. Her tone was different from the one she used with me, softer but also more calculating. The other voice was male, Julian. Something inside me warned me that I should leave, that I should take my phone and get out of that house immediately. But my feet didn't move. Instead, I found myself walking silently toward the kitchen, from where I could hear better what they were saying without being seen. "I already told you he can't wait 6 more months, Julian was saying, his voice loaded with a tension I had never heard in him. The educated and polite man from the party had disappeared, replaced by someone desperate and dangerous. "The guys I owe aren't going to wait until we get married and have access to your inheritance." "And what do you want me to do?" Harper responded with irritation. "I can't make my mother die any faster, although, believe me, after how she ruined my party with her pathetic behavior. I wouldn't mind if she disappeared tomorrow." I felt as if icy water had been thrown on me. I grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter, trying to process what I had just heard. My own daughter, speaking of my death with that cruel indifference, as if I were simply an inconvenient obstacle on her path to money. "That is precisely the point," continued Julian, and something in his tone made my skin crawl. "Maybe we don't need to wait for nature to take its course." There was a silence, a long and terrible silence that made me hold my breath. What exactly are you suggesting? Harper asked, but her voice didn't sound horrified or scandalized. It sounded curious, interested. Accidents happen all the time, especially with elderly people who live alone, Julian said, and I swear I could hear the sinister smile in his voice. A fall down the stairs, a gas leak, a fire, tragic things, but completely plausible. Julian, you are talking about killing my mother, Harper said, but not as an accusation. She said it as if she were seriously considering the proposal, weighing the pros and cons of a business plan. I am talking about solving a problem, Julian corrected. You yourself said that your mother changed her will last year, that she now plans to leave part of her house and savings to your Aunt Patty and that ridiculous charity she supports. If we wait for her to die naturally, you could end up with less than half of what you're entitled to. But if something were to happen to her now, before she makes more changes, you would be the sole direct heir. My mind worked frantically. It was true that I had updated my will. After Arthur's death, after years of coldness from Harper, I had decided that my sister Patty deserved some security in her old age. And I had designated a considerable sum to a shelter for battered women, a cause that mattered deeply to me. But I never imagined Harper would find out, much less that she would care so much. How much do you need exactly? Harper asked after another loaded silence. $50,000 by Friday, or the guys I mentioned are going to break my legs. And that's if I get lucky. If I don't, I will simply disappear and no one will ever hear from me again. I don't have $50,000, Julian. I spent almost everything on this damn house and on keeping up appearances. But your mother does. Or at least she has a house worth 10 times that. Once she is gone, we can sell the property immediately. I know someone who can make it look like a completely natural accident. He's discreet, professional. No one will suspect a thing. You already contacted someone. Harper's voice sounded firmer now, more decisive. My daughter was discussing my murder with the same naturalness with which she would have planned a vacation. I have a contact, a guy who worked with me in construction years ago, before he got fired for. Well, that doesn't matter. The point is, he knows how to do these things, and he needs the money as much as I do. How much does he charge? $10,000, cash. And he wants it up front. I don't have $10,000 in cash, Julian. But you have credit cards, jewelry, things you can sell or pawn quickly. And once your mother is out of the way, you'll be able to pay all that off, and much more. Another silence. I could imagine them in the yard, looking at each other, reaching a silent agreement that would seal my fate. When? Harper asked finally. This afternoon. Today. Your mother lives alone, right? She doesn't have sophisticated security systems. Her building is old. It will be easy. The guy will go in, do his job, and by tomorrow everything will be over. This afternoon, Harper repeated, and there was something in her voice that froze my blood. It wasn't horror, it wasn't doubt. It was acceptance. Okay, do it. I didn't wait to hear more. I backed out of the kitchen, walking backward as silently as I could, my heart beating so hard I feared they could hear it from the yard. My hands shook violently as I clutched my phone against my chest. I reached the front door, opened it carefully so it wouldn't make noise, and stepped out into the sunlight which now seemed completely unreal. I walked toward my car as if I were in a dream, or rather, a nightmare. I got in, closed the door, locked it, and sat there, trying to get my brain to process what I had just heard. My daughter had just ordered my death. My only daughter, the girl who had grown in my womb, whom I had nursed and comforted on stormy nights, had just signed my death warrant for money, for an inheritance that wasn't even that big, for a modest house and some savings I had accumulated, penny by penny, during decades of honest work. And worst of all, they were right about one thing. I lived alone. My building was old, with minimal security, a doorman who worked only until 6 in the evening and then left the main door with a code that all the residents knew. No one would notice a stranger entering my apartment. No one would come to help me if I screamed. I looked at the clock on my dashboard. It was 3:15 in the afternoon. Julian had said this afternoon. That could mean any time from now until nightfall. How much time did I have? An hour? 2? 10 minutes? My hands were still shaking when I started the engine. I needed to think. I needed a plan. But above all, I needed to stay alive. I drove aimlessly for several minutes, going around streets I didn't recognize, my brain working at a frantic speed as I tried to decide what to do. Every car I saw in the rearview mirror seemed suspicious. Every person on the sidewalk could be the assassin Julian had hired. The world had become a hostile and threatening place in a matter of seconds. My first instinct was to call the police. I took the phone out of my pocket, my fingers clumsy from the adrenaline running through my veins. But then I stopped. What exactly would I tell them? That I heard my daughter and her fiancé planning to kill me? Without proof? Without witnesses? They would deny everything. They would say I was crazy, that I was a bitter mother inventing stories to ruin her daughter's happiness. And they would probably believe them, not a 68-year-old widow with tears in her eyes and a story that sounded ripped from a cheap suspense movie. Besides, the time it would take to file the report, explain the situation, convince some officer to take me seriously, could be time I didn't have. Julian had been very clear. This afternoon, today, the killer could already be on his way to my apartment, waiting for me to return to make it look like it had been a domestic accident. I parked at a rest area off the highway, my hand still gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. I needed to think clearly. I needed to be smart. Panic wouldn't save me. Only cunning would. Then I remembered my phone. The recording. It had been recording for 2 days. Was it possible it had captured the conversation I had just heard? The device had been in the living room, not far from the yard. If the voices had been loud enough, if the microphone had worked, with trembling fingers, I opened the gallery app. There it was. A video more than 40 hours long. The file was huge. It had probably filled all the available memory on the phone before stopping. I needed to review it, but I couldn't do it there. In my car, in the middle of a highway. I needed a safe place. I thought about going to Patty's house, but discarded it immediately. If Julian or Harper decided to look for me, that would be the first place they would check. I needed a place where no one would think to look for me, where I could have time to review the recording and decide my next steps. The motel. There was a cheap motel about 20 minutes from where I was, one of those anonymous places where no one asks questions and you pay in cash. Arthur and I had passed by there many times when we went to visit his brother in the neighboring town. We had never stayed there, but I remembered the sign, the Greenview Motel, rates by the hour and by the night. I drove there, constantly checking the rearview mirror, making sure no one was following me. The motel was exactly as I remembered it, a low 2-story building with doors painted a faded green and a gravel parking lot. The neon sign flickered even in broad daylight, announcing vacancies. The reception smelled of dampness and stale tobacco. A man of about 50 with a prominent belly and a stained t-shirt looked at me from behind the counter, barely looking up from his mobile phone. "I need a room for tonight," I said, trying to make my voice sound firm and normal. "I'll pay cash, $80 a night. Payment up front," he responded without much interest, extending a greasy hand. I took the money from my wallet, mentally giving thanks that I had gone to the bank the previous week. The man handed me a physical key, not an electronic card, and pointed vaguely toward the second floor. "Room 208, upstairs, end of the hall. Wi-Fi doesn't work very well, but there's cable." I didn't care about the Wi-Fi or the cable. I just needed 4 walls and a door with a lock. I went up the metal stairs that creaked under my feet and found my room. It was small and depressing, with a bed that had seen better days, an old television, and a tiny bathroom. But it had what I needed: privacy and relative security. I locked the door, slid the security chain, and dragged the only chair in the room to place it under the handle, an additional precaution I had seen in movies. Then I sat on the bed and took out my phone. The battery was at 5%. I desperately searched for a charger in my purse and thanked God when I found a crumpled one at the bottom. I plugged it into the wall and waited a few minutes until the phone had enough charge to work without turning off. I opened the video again. 42 hours of recording. I didn't have time to review everything. I needed to go directly to the end, to the final hours, where the conversation I had heard would be. I moved the progress bar forward, toward the last 2 hours of recording. The screen showed mostly Harper's empty living room, the strange angle from the shelf capturing part of the sofa and the entrance to the yard. For long minutes, nothing happened, just the silent room and the occasional movement of the curtains in the wind. Then they appeared. Harper and Julian entering from the yard, their voices clear and crisp. My heart raced. The phone had recorded them. I had the proof. I turned the volume up to the maximum and listened again to the conversation I had heard in person just an hour ago. But this time it was different. This time it was recorded, documented, irrefutable. Every cruel word from Harper, every sinister suggestion from Julian, every detail of the plan to murder me. When the recording ended, I stared at the dark screen of the phone, feeling a strange mix of terror and relief. Terror, because the threat was real, because my own daughter really wanted to see me dead. Relief, because I had evidence, because I wasn't crazy, because I could prove I wasn't inventing anything. But what to do with this evidence? Now that I had it, how could I use it to keep myself alive? I looked at the clock on the motel wall. 4:30 in the afternoon. More than 2 hours had passed since I had heard the conversation. The killer could already be in my building. He could be forcing the lock of my apartment at this very instant. Or worse, he could be waiting for me, knowing that eventually I would have to return. I needed help. I needed someone who would believe me, who would help me navigate this nightmare. My sister Patty was the obvious option. But could I put her in danger? If Harper and Julian discovered she knew something, would they also make her a target? Then I thought of Benjamin Stone, the lawyer who had helped Arthur with his will years ago. He was an honest man, one of the few left in the world. He had been a friend of my husband since college and had always treated us well, charging fair fees and giving free legal advice when we needed it. After Arthur's death, he had been the one who helped me get all the inheritance papers in order, who ensured that Harper couldn't manipulate the situation in her favor when I was too shattered to think clearly. I looked for his number in my contact list. My fingers hesitated over the screen. It was almost 5 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. He would probably be in his office, or maybe already on his way home. Would he answer the call of a client who hadn't spoken to him in over a year? I had no other choice. I pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times. 4, 5. I was about to hang up when I heard his familiar voice. "Eleanor? Is that you?" "Ben," I said, and my voice cracked. All the strength I had maintained over the last few hours crumbled suddenly. "I need help. My daughter. She is trying to kill me." There was a brief silence that felt eternal. "Where are you?" he asked finally, his voice professional but with a tone of urgency. "Tell me where you are right now." I gave him the motel's address. I heard the sound of keys and a door closing on the other end of the line. "Don't move from there. I'm coming to you. Eleanor, listen to me closely. Do not speak to anyone. Do not open the door to anyone except me." "Understood," I whispered. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Keep your phone on." He hung up, and I sat on that depressing motel bed, hugging myself, trying to keep at bay the panic that threatened to consume me. The 20 minutes I waited for Ben felt like 20 hours. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door, jumping at every noise in the hallway. Every footstep on the metal stairs, every car engine in the parking lot, every distant voice made me think Julian or the killer had found me somehow. I checked my phone obsessively, verifying that the recording was still there, that it wasn't a product of my terrified imagination. I played random fragments just to confirm the voices were clear, that the words were unmistakable. Every time I heard Harper say, "Okay, do it," I felt a new stab in my chest. Finally, 3 firm knocks on the door made me jump. "Eleanor, it's me, Ben." I approached the door with caution, looking through the peephole. It was him, unmistakable, with his gray hair combed with care and his dark suit slightly wrinkled after a day of work. I opened the door quickly, and he entered, closing it immediately behind him. Benjamin Stone was 62 years old, but he kept himself in good shape. His brown eyes scanned me with professional concern, evaluating my state with the experience of someone who had seen many clients in crisis throughout his career. "Tell me everything," he said, without preamble, gesturing to the bed for me to sit while he took the chair I had placed against the door. He took a small notebook and a pen from his briefcase. "From the beginning, don't omit any detail." And so I did. I told him about the party, about the humiliation, about how I had left my phone recording unintentionally. I told him about my return to Harper's house 2 days later, about the conversation I had heard in the yard. I told him about Julian and his gambling debts, about the plan to make it look like an accident, about the $50,000 they needed urgently. Ben listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes, his expression becoming increasingly serious. When I finished, he put his notebook aside and extended his hand. "Show me the recording." I handed him my phone and watched his face as he played the video. I saw his jaw tighten, his eyes narrowing with every damning sentence. When it finished, he leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly. "This is solid evidence of conspiracy to commit murder," he said finally, his lawyer voice taking control. "With this, we can go to the police and get immediate arrest warrants." "But will they believe me?" I asked, my voice small and scared. "Harper is very convincing. She could say the recording is manipulated, that I edited it somehow to make her look bad. Forensics can verify the authenticity of the recording," Ben responded firmly. "Besides, there are specific details in that conversation. Julian mentions a contact, someone who worked with him in construction. That can be traced. He mentions a specific debt, $50,000 by Friday. All that can be verified and investigated." He handed the phone back to me, and I put it in my purse as if it were the most valuable object in the world. And at that moment, it was. It was the difference between life and death. "There is something else you need to know," Ben continued, his tone becoming even more serious if that was possible. "You cannot go back to your apartment, not until this is resolved. If that man Julian hired is waiting for you there, you would be walking straight into a trap." "So what do I do?" I asked, feeling panic begin to climb up my throat again. "Do I stay hiding forever? Do I let Harper and Julian win?" "Of course not," Ben said, and there was something in his voice that made me remember why Arthur trusted him so much. "We are going to go to the police right now. We are going to present this evidence, and we are going to make sure your daughter and her fiancé face the consequences of their actions. But first, I need you to do something for me." He took out his own phone and opened an app. "I'm going to send you a link. I want you to upload that video to cloud storage. Don't just keep it on your phone. If something happens to that device, we need to have a backup copy." It made sense. I did what he asked, although my old, slow phone took several minutes to upload the huge file. While we waited, Ben made some calls, first to the police station, asking for a specific detective he knew from previous cases, then to someone else. A shorter conversation where he only said, "It's urgent. I need a favor." When finally the video finished uploading to the cloud, Ben stood up. "Let's go. I have a contact at the district attorney's office who is going to see us. It's better to go directly there than to a regular police station. This is a case of attempted murder. We need them to take it seriously from the start." I followed him out of the motel room, feeling a mix of relief and terror. Relief because finally, I was doing something concrete to protect myself. Terror because this would make the situation real and irreversible. Once we presented the evidence, there would be no turning back. My relationship with Harper, however toxic and damaging it had been, would end definitively. My daughter would go to prison, and I would have to live the rest of my days knowing that my own flesh and blood had wanted to see me dead. We were going down the motel stairs when my phone rang. Patty's number appeared on the screen. "Eleanor, thank God. Where are you? Harper called me an hour ago asking for you. She says you went to her house to get your phone and that when she arrived from the grocery store you were gone." She sounded worried, but there was something weird in her voice, something I didn't like. I looked at Ben, who had heard enough to understand the situation. He nodded, signaling me to answer. "Patty, listen to me carefully. Do not tell Harper you spoke with me. Do not tell her anything. And please, do not go to your house tonight. Stay at a hotel or with a friend, but not at your house." "What? Eleanor, you're scaring me. What is happening?" "I can't explain it to you now, but trust me. Please, do what I tell you, and tomorrow I will explain everything." There was a tense silence. "Are you in danger?" my sister asked finally, her voice trembling. I was. "But now I am with Ben and we are on our way to the DA's office. Everything is going to be fine. I'm coming over there." "No," I said firmly. "Stay away from this for now. I promise I will call you as soon as I can." I hung up before she could protest. Ben was already in his car, a gray sedan that had seen better days but was impeccably clean inside. I sat in the passenger seat and he started the engine. The drive to the district attorney's office took 40 minutes in the afternoon traffic. During the ride, Ben explained to me what to expect. There would be questions. Many questions. I would have to tell my story several times. They would review the recording meticulously. They would take my official statement. And if everything went as we expected, they would issue arrest warrants for Harper and Julian that same night. And the man Julian hired? I asked. What about him? The police will send a unit to your building. If he is there waiting for you, they will catch him. And if he isn't there, Harper and Julian's statements under interrogation will eventually lead to him. The DA's building was a modern structure of glass and concrete downtown. Ben guided me through the hallways with the confidence of someone who had been there many times before. We went up to the third floor and entered an office where a woman of about 40 in a formal suit and a serious expression was waiting for us. District Attorney Catherine Hayes introduced herself, shaking my hand with a firm grip. Ben told me briefly about your situation on the phone. I need to hear your full story and see that recording. For the next 2 hours, I relived every detail of my nightmare. DA Hayes took notes constantly, pausing the recording at specific moments, making me clarify certain points. There were moments when I thought I couldn't continue, that the emotional weight of it all was too much. But Ben was there, by my side, reminding me with his simple presence that I wasn't alone. When we finally finished, Catherine Hayes leaned back in her chair and looked at me with an expression that mixed professionalism with something that looked like genuine compassion. Mrs. Robinson, what you have lived through is terrible, and what is documented in that recording is sufficient to proceed with serious criminal charges, she said. I am going to request immediate arrest warrants for Harper Robinson and Julian Miller for conspiracy to commit murder. I am also going to coordinate with the police to check your building and your apartment. How long will it take? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The adrenaline that had kept me functioning for the last few hours was beginning to fade, leaving me exhausted and trembling. The arrest warrants can be ready in an hour, Hayes responded, checking her watch. It's 7 o'clock. By 8:30, I will have teams moving to execute the arrests. Meanwhile, you cannot be alone, and you definitely cannot return to your house. She can stay with me, Ben offered immediately. My wife and I have a guest room. Will she be safe there? The DA nodded with approval. Perfect. Mrs. Robinson, I am going to assign you police protection as well. An officer will accompany you to Mr. Stone's house and will remain outside during the night. It's just a precaution, but given the circumstances, I prefer not to take risks. I felt overwhelmed by the kindness of these two strangers who were doing so much for me. Well, Ben wasn't exactly a stranger, but I hadn't seen him in over a year, and even so, he had dropped everything to help me without asking questions, without doubting my word. Thank you, I managed to say, although the words felt inadequate to express what I really felt. DA Hayes made several more calls, her authoritative voice giving precise instructions. I heard snippets: suspicion of attempted homicide, priority arrests, possible accomplice in the building. Every word made the situation feel more real and more terrifying. Approximately an hour later, just as she had promised, the DA informed us that the arrest warrants had been approved. 2 police teams were on their way, one to Harper's house and another to Julian's apartment. A third team had been sent to my building to verify if there was anyone suspicious loitering or if they had forced entry into my apartment. Do you want to be present when they arrest them? The DA asked, looking at me curiously. It's not necessary, but some family members like to see justice being executed. I shook my head immediately. I didn't want to see Harper handcuffed. I didn't want to see her face when she realized her plan had failed. I didn't want to have that image etched in my memory forever. I just want to go home eventually, I said quietly. I want this to end. I understand. Ben, keep me informed of anything unusual. Mrs. Robinson, I will be in touch tomorrow morning. We will probably need a more formal statement, and there are some papers you will have to sign. We left the DA's building when the sun had already set completely. The officer assigned to protect me was waiting outside, a young man of about 30 named Officer Alonso, who greeted me with professional respect, but with a warmth in his eyes that made me feel a little safer. Mrs. Robinson, I'm going to follow you to Mr. Stone's house, and I'll stay outside through the night, he explained. If you see, hear, or feel anything out of the ordinary, call me immediately. Here is my direct number." He handed me a card, and I put it in my purse next to my phone and the few belongings I had taken with me in this surreal nightmare. The trip to Ben's house was quiet. He drove in silence, probably giving me space to process everything that had happened. Officer Alonso followed at a discreet distance in his unmarked cruiser. Through the window, I watched the city lights pass by, the normal life of normal people eating in restaurants, walking their dogs, laughing with their families. Everything seemed so distant to me, as if I were watching the world from behind thick glass that separated me from normality. Ben's house was in a quiet residential neighborhood, a 2-story colonial with a well-kept front lawn. His wife, a woman named Susan, whom I remembered vaguely from some gathering years ago, met us at the door with an expression of maternal concern. "Oh, Eleanor, dear," she said, hugging me without asking permission. Something that normally would have made me uncomfortable but at that moment made me cry. "Ben told me everything. You are safe here. No one will hurt you." She led me inside while Ben spoke briefly with Officer Alonso outside. The house was cozy, with comfortable furniture and family photographs on the walls. The smell of homemade food floated in the air, reminding me that I hadn't eaten anything all day. "You must be starving," Susan said, reading my thoughts. "I made chicken soup. Nothing fancy, but it comforts the soul." I had no appetite, but she insisted, and I ended up sitting at her kitchen table, sipping hot soup that effectively comforted something inside me. Ben joined us after ensuring Officer Alonso was positioned strategically with a view of the main entrance. "The news won't take long to arrive," Ben said, pouring himself coffee. "Once they execute the arrests, Catherine Hayes will contact us." We wait. The minutes dragged like hours. Susan tried to make casual conversation about anything except the current situation. She asked me about my health, about how the building where I lived was, about whether I had seen any good movies recently. They were mundane and trivial questions, but I appreciated the effort she made to keep me distracted. Around 9:30 at night, Ben's phone rang. I watched his expression change as he listened, nodding occasionally, asking short questions. When he hung up, he looked at me with a mix of relief and something darker. "They arrested them," he said simply. "Both of them. Harper was at her house when the police team arrived. Julian was with her. They didn't resist. I should have felt relief. I should have felt victory. But the only thing I felt was a deep and painful emptiness. My daughter was in a cell. The girl who had grown inside me, to whom I had given life, was being processed as a criminal. And she was. She was a criminal who had tried to kill me. But she was still my daughter. "And the other man?" I asked. "The one Julian hired. They found him too," Ben responded, and his expression became more somber. "He was inside your apartment, Eleanor. He forced the back lock. The one on the balcony, he was prepping the place to make it look like you had an accidental gas leak. If you had gone back home this afternoon." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The three of us knew exactly what would have happened if I had returned to my apartment. I would be dead. My body would have been found tomorrow morning, perhaps by the building manager or by some neighbor who smelled gas. Harper would have cried crocodile tears at my funeral. She would have inherited everything, and no one would have suspected a thing. 10 minutes, I whispered, remembering the words I had thought when I first listened to the recording. If I hadn't forgotten my phone, if I hadn't gone back to look for it right when they were talking, if I hadn't heard their plans, I would have had only 10 minutes of life left when I got home. Susan approached and took my hand in hers. "But it didn't happen," she said firmly. "You are here. You are alive. And those monsters are going to pay for what they tried to do." Ben's phone rang again. This time it was a longer conversation. I could hear he was talking to DA Hayes, discussing legal details my tired brain couldn't process completely. When he finally hung up, he sat in front of me with a serious expression. "Harper and Julian are being interrogated separately," he explained. "Apparently, Julian started talking almost immediately. He's giving them all the details. How he met the man he hired, how much he paid him, exactly what he ordered him to do. He's trying to cut a deal, blaming Harper for being the mastermind behind everything." "And her?" I asked, although part of me didn't want to know the answer. "Harper hasn't said anything yet. She asked for a lawyer, but with the recording, Julian's testimony, and the fact that they caught the hitman literally in your apartment preparing the crime scene, there isn't much her lawyer can do. I felt tears begin to fall down my cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness exactly, nor of relief. They were tears of something more complex. A mix of loss, betrayal, survival, and deep emotional fatigue. How long will they be in prison? I asked, wiping my cheeks with the back of my hand. That depends on many factors, Ben responded carefully. But conspiracy to commit murder, premeditated attempted homicide, we are talking about long sentences. Decades, potentially, especially with such clear evidence. Decades. My daughter would spend decades in prison. She would grow old behind bars, and I would grow old out here, alone, knowing that my only daughter had hated me enough to want to see me dead. You should sleep, Susan said softly. I prepared the guest room. There are clean clothes and everything you might need. Tomorrow will be another difficult day, and you need to rest. She was right, although the idea of sleeping seemed impossible to me. She led me upstairs to a small but cozy room, with a bed covered by a flowered quilt and curtains that blocked the streetlight. On the bed was a clean nightgown and basic toiletries. If you need anything, whatever it is, just call, Susan said, pointing to the phone on the nightstand. Ben and I will be awake for a while longer downstairs. She left me alone, and I sat on the bed, looking around this strange room that was my temporary refuge. I changed into the nightgown Susan had left and got under the clean sheets that smelled of lavender. The bed was comfortable, much more so than the one in my own apartment, but I couldn't relax. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harper's face. Not the adult, cruel Harper who had ordered my death, but the child Harper, the one who used to climb into my bed during storms, the one who hugged me and told me I was the best mom in the world. At what moment had everything broken? Had it been gradual, or had there been a specific moment when I lost my daughter? I mentally reviewed years of cold interactions, forgotten birthdays, unreturned calls. The signs had always been there, but I had ignored them, clinging to the hope that someday things would improve. Sleep finally came around 2 a.m, but it was restless and full of nightmares. I dreamed I was in my apartment when the gas began to fill the space. I dreamed I was running, but my legs wouldn't move. I dreamed I was screaming, but no one could hear me. I woke up startled around 6 a.m, my heart beating strongly, disoriented for a moment until I remembered where I was. The gray light of dawn filtered through the curtains, downstairs. I could hear sounds of activity in the kitchen. I got up, washed my face in the attached bathroom, and went down the stairs. Susan was already preparing coffee, dressed and groomed as if it were a normal day. Ben was at the table, reviewing papers and his laptop, with that slightly sleep-deprived look of someone who hadn't slept enough. "Good morning," Susan greeted me with a gentle smile. "Coffee? Toast?" I accepted the coffee but rejected the food. My stomach remained a tight knot of anxiety. Ben looked up from his computer. "D.A. Hayes called half an hour ago," he said. "She wants to see us in her office at 10. There are some new developments." "What kind of developments?" I asked, feeling anxiety take hold of me again. She didn't give details over the phone. She only said it was important that you be present. The following hours passed in a kind of haze. I showered, put on the same clothes from the day before because I had nothing else. I tried to eat some of the toast Susan insisted on preparing for me. Officer Alonso was still outside, now relieved by another officer named Martina, who greeted us with polite professionalism. We arrived at the DA's office exactly at 10. Catherine Hayes was waiting for us in her office, but this time she wasn't alone. There was an older man with her, in his 50s, with a dark suit and a serious expression that made me nervous immediately. "Mrs. Robinson, this is Detective Michael O'Connor," the DA introduced. "He has been in charge of the investigation since last night." The detective shook my hand with a firm grip, but not excessive. "Ma'am, first of all, let me tell you that your survival instinct probably saved your life," he said with a grave and reassuring voice, "and that accidental recording was the most solid evidence I have seen in years." "What happened last night after the arrests?" I asked, sitting in the chair they offered me. The DA and the detective exchanged a look. Julian Miller started talking almost immediately. Detective O'Connor began. He confessed everything. The gambling debts actually totaled more than what he told Harper. He owes approximately $90,000 to 3 different loan sharks, all with dangerous connections. He was desperate. According to him, it was Harper who first suggested that it would be convenient if you had an accident. Every word was a blow. It had been her idea. My own daughter had been the one to first verbalize the thought of killing me. Julian gave up the name of the man he hired, the detective continued. His name is Rick Evans. He has a record for assault and extortion. Julian paid him $10,000, money Harper took from her credit cards, and by selling some jewelry she had. Evans confessed too when we confronted him with Julian's testimony. He said he was just doing a job, that he had nothing personal against you. How comforting, I murmured bitterly. Harper, on the other hand, has been less cooperative, D.A. Hayes said. Her lawyer is trying to argue that she was being manipulated by Julian, that he convinced her to go down that path, but the recording clearly contradicts that. In the audio, you hear her making decisions, accepting the plan, giving her final approval. What does this mean legally? Ben asked. Always the professional lawyer, even in the midst of emotional chaos. Both are being charged with conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder, the DA responded. Rick Evans is being charged with attempted murder. With the evidence we have, I am confident we will get convictions. Julian will probably get a slightly reduced sentence for cooperating, but we are still talking about 15 to 20 years. Harper could face 20 to 25 years without the possibility of parole. 20 to 25 years. My daughter would be over 50 when she got out, if she lived to see it. And I, if I was still alive by then, would be an old woman of almost 90. There is something else, Detective O'Connor said, and something in his tone let me know what was coming would be hard to hear. When we searched Harper's house, we found her copy of your will, Mrs. Robinson. The one you made last year. And? I asked, confused as to why that was relevant. Harper had it in her possession. Furthermore, we found drafts of a new will on her computer, one she had been preparing. She was forging your signature, ma'am. She planned to replace your real will with a fake one that would leave her as the sole heir of everything. I was speechless. Not only had she planned to kill me, but she had been preparing the ground to ensure she would get every penny, every possession, everything Arthur and I had worked to build over a lifetime. That adds charges of fraud and attempted forgery, the DA added with professional satisfaction. Her case gets stronger with every hour that passes. When will the trial be? I asked, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. Probably in 6 to 8 months, the DA responded. There are procedures that must be followed, preliminary hearings, motions, but with the evidence we have, there is a possibility they might accept a plea deal to avoid trial. I will have to testify. The idea terrified me. Seeing Harper in court, sitting at the defense table, looking at me while I explained how I had discovered her plan to murder me. Probably yes, Ben said softly. But we will be there with you, every step of the way. The meeting continued for another hour, with more legal details, more explanations of procedures, more questions about my relationship with Harper over the years. They wanted to establish a pattern of behavior, proof that there had been hostility on her part for a long time. When we finally left the DA's office, I felt completely empty. Ben suggested we eat something, but I just wanted to be alone. I needed to process everything. I needed to start understanding how I was going to rebuild my life after this. When can I go back to my apartment? I asked. The crime scene has already been processed, Ben responded. Technically, you can return today if you want. But Eleanor, are you sure it's a good idea? It's the place. It's my home, I said with more firmness than I felt. I'm not going to let them take that away from me too. Ben insisted on accompanying me when I finally decided to return to my apartment that same afternoon. Susan had packed some provisions in a bag, food I could easily heat up, as if I were a child going to camp instead of a 68-year-old woman returning to the house where she was almost murdered. The ride was silent. I looked out the window of Ben's car, observing the familiar streets of my neighborhood, wondering if they would ever feel safe again. Every person on the sidewalk was a potential threat. Every car that followed us for more than 2 blocks made my heart race. When we arrived at my building, I saw the yellow police tape still hanging from the door of the rear balcony of my apartment. The manager, Mr. Henderson, was in the lobby and approached immediately when he saw me enter. Mrs. Robinson, my God, he he said, his eyes full of genuine concern. The police were here all night. They told me what happened. I can't believe someone tried to. In my building. It's okay, Mr. Henderson, I told him, though clearly it wasn't okay. Did they fix the balcony lock? Yes. I called a locksmith this morning. He put on a new lock, very secure, and I also changed the building code, just in case. Here is the new number. He handed me a piece of paper with a combination of numbers I memorized immediately. Ben and I went up to the 3rd floor, our steps echoing in the stairwell. My door was intact, at least on the outside, but there was a mark where the police had put a seal they had later removed. I opened it with my key, my hand trembling slightly. The door opened, revealing my apartment, my home for the last 5 years. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but then I noticed the small details. Fingerprint dust on some surfaces, furniture slightly moved from its usual position, the rear balcony window open to ventilate. And the smell? A residual chemical smell that let me know the police had found what Rick Evans had prepared. The gas that would have filled my home, that would have ended my life while I slept or simply breathed. Are you sure about this? Ben asked, watching my face while I looked around. I have to be, I responded, entering fully and closing the door behind us. I cannot let fear turn me into a prisoner in my own life. We spent the next hour checking the apartment. Ben verified all the windows, all the locks, even checked under the bed and inside the closets, as if we were going to find some danger lurking. I cleaned the fingerprint dust, returned the furniture to its correct places, tried to make the space feel mine again. The apartment phone rang, making me jump. I looked at it with distrust before answering. Eleanor. It was Patty, her voice loaded with relief and worry. Finally, you answer. I've been trying to reach you all day. What the hell is going on? I saw on the news that they arrested Harper and Julian. They said something about attempted murder, but didn't give victims' names. Please tell me it's not what I'm thinking. I sat on the sofa, suddenly exhausted. It is exactly what you are thinking, I said quietly. Harper and Julian planned to kill me, Patty. They hired someone to make it look like an accident. I heard a sob on the other end of the line. Oh my God, Eleanor. How? Why? I told her everything, from the beginning. The party, the humiliation, the forgotten phone, the accidental recording, the conversation I had heard. Patty cried openly while I spoke, interrupting occasionally with exclamations of horror and disbelief. I'm coming over there, she said when I finished. Right now. You shouldn't be alone. I'm with Ben, Arthur's lawyer. But yes, come. I need to see you. Patty arrived 30 minutes later, carrying a small suitcase. I'm going to stay with you for a few days, she announced, without giving me an option to refuse. I don't care if there's room or not. I'll sleep on the couch if necessary, but I'm not leaving you alone after something like this. I hugged her, letting her arms hold me while I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. I cried on her shoulder like I hadn't cried since Arthur's death, tears coming from a deep and broken place inside me. Ben said goodbye shortly after, making me promise I would call him if I needed anything. Patty made tea, and we sat at my small dining table, the same table where Arthur and Harper and I had shared thousands of meals when she was little. How did we end up here? I asked, staring at my cup of tea. At what moment did my daughter become someone capable of this? I don't know, sister, Patty responded with sadness. But I know it's not your fault. You were a good mother, the best you could be. Harper made her own decisions, horrible decisions, and now she has to face the consequences. She will spend decades in prison, I whispered. My only daughter, the blood of my blood. Your only daughter tried to murder you for money, Patty said harshly. You cannot allow yourself to feel pity for her. Eleanor, she didn't feel pity for you when she was planning your death. She was right. I knew it. But a mother's heart doesn't work with logic. We love even when we shouldn't. We forgive even the unforgivable. We suffer for our children, no matter how much harm they cause us. The following days passed in a strange routine. Patty stayed with me, sleeping on the couch despite my protests. Ben called daily with updates on the case. D.A. Hayes summoned me twice more to clarify details and sign statements. The neighbors in the building looked at me with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity when I crossed paths with them in the hallway. The story had been on the local news. They didn't mention my name specifically because I was the victim, but the neighborhood was small and gossip traveled fast. Everyone knew that the woman on the third floor had almost been murdered by her own daughter. A week after the arrests, Ben called me with news. "Harper wants to see you," he said without preamble. "She requested a visit. You are within your rights to deny it, of course. No one would expect you to want to see her after what she did." My first instinct was to say, "No. Why would I want to see the person who had ordered my death? What possible good could come from that meeting?" But there was something inside me, that stubborn part of a mother that never dies no matter how much damage it receives, that needed to see her one last time. I needed to look her in the eyes and hear what possible explanation she could have. I needed that closure, however painful it might be. "I'll go," I said, surprising myself. "When?" "Tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock. I'll accompany you." "Of course." Patty protested vigorously when I told her. "Are you crazy? You want to go see the person who tried to kill you?" "For what, Eleanor? So she can hurt you more?" "I need to do it," I said simply. "I need to hear what she has to say, and I need to say some things to her too. Then I'm going with you." "No. This is something I have to do alone." The argument continued for hours, but finally Patty gave in, although she made me promise I would keep calm, that I wouldn't let Harper manipulate me emotionally once again. The next day, Ben came to pick me up at 2:30. The ride to the county jail, where Harper was being held, was long and silent. I looked out the window, mentally preparing myself to see my daughter behind glass, dressed in a prison uniform, paying the consequences of having tried to kill me. The jail was a gray and depressing building surrounded by high fences with barbed wire. We went through several security checks, left our belongings in lockers, were scanned and checked. Finally, they took us to a visitation room divided by thick glass panels, with phones on each side to communicate. I sat on an uncomfortable plastic chair and waited. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. Ben was standing behind me, a silent and comforting presence. Then the door on the other side opened, and Harper walked in. I almost didn't recognize her. In just a week, my daughter had transformed into someone different. Without makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dressed in the orange prison jumpsuit. She seemed younger and more vulnerable than I had seen her in years. But when our eyes met through the glass, I saw that the coldness was still there, that emotional distance that had always existed between us. She sat in front of me and picked up the phone on her side. I did the same, pressing the receiver against my ear with a trembling hand. "Mom," she said, and her voice sounded different, smaller, almost like the girl she used to be. "Thanks for coming." I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at her, this person who had grown inside me, whom I had loved unconditionally for 42 years, and who had been willing to wipe me from existence for money. "Why did you ask to see me?" I asked finally, keeping my voice neutral. Harper lowered her gaze. "I needed to explain. I needed you to understand that I didn't, that things got out of control. Julian was desperate, he pressured me, and I—" "No," I interrupted her firmly. "You are not going to blame Julian. I heard the recording. Harper, I heard your voice when you said, 'Okay, do it.' No one pressured you. You made a decision." Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't sure if they were genuine or calculated. "I was angry with you," she said, her voice cracking. "I was always angry. Since Dad died and I found out he had changed his will, that he had left money for Aunt Patty and for that stupid charity, as if strangers deserved more than your own daughter. Your father left you the lake house and $50,000, I responded, feeling anger begin to replace the pain. That was more than generous. But it wasn't enough for you, was it? Nothing was ever enough. You changed your will too, she accused me, her sadness transforming into resentment, without even telling me, as if I didn't matter. I changed my will because for years you treated me like trash, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Because every time I tried to get close to you, you rejected me. Because the only time you showed interest in me was when you needed money. And you know what, Harper? Even so, I loved you. Even so, I sold your father's jewelry to pay for that damn party. Even so, I would have done anything for you. But it wasn't enough, she whispered. You were never enough. Dad was the strong one, the successful one. You were just the wife, the mother, nothing special. Those words hit me like a physical slap. It was the rawest and most painful truth Harper had ever told me. To her, I had never been a complete person, only a role, a function to fulfill. And when I stopped being useful, I stopped having value. I came here thinking that maybe there would be some explanation, I said, feeling something inside me close definitively. That maybe you would show real remorse, that you would recognize the magnitude of what you tried to do. But I see you only wanted to justify yourself. You wanted to make me feel guilty somehow for your actions. It's not like that, Harper protested, tears running down her cheeks now. Mom, I regret it. Really, if I could turn back time, but you can't, I interrupted her. And even if you could, I'm not sure you would make a different decision. The problem was never Julian, nor the money, nor even the will. The problem is that somewhere along the way, you lost your humanity. You became someone capable of planning her own mother's death with the same coldness with which she would plan a vacation. I stood up, ready to end this conversation that was only reopening wounds. Wait, Harper said urgently. Please, don't leave like this. I need you to forgive me. I need to know that someday we can. No, I said with a clarity that surprised even me. There is no forgiveness for this. Harper, there is no way back. You will spend many years in prison thinking about what you did, and I will spend the rest of my life rebuilding myself, surrounding myself with people who truly love me, living for myself for the first time in decades. So that's it? She asked, her voice now full of rage instead of sadness. You're going to abandon me here? I am not abandoning you, I responded calmly. You abandoned yourself the moment you decided my life was worth less than your inheritance. Goodbye, Harper. I hung up the phone before she could respond and walked away without looking back. Ben caught up to me in the hallway, his hand on my shoulder in a gesture of silent support. Are you okay? He asked, as we left the building into the fresh outside air. I will be, I responded. And for the first time in a long time, I really believed it. The following months were about rebuilding. Harper finally accepted a plea deal after Julian testified against her. She received 23 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Julian received 18 years. Rick Evans, the man they had hired, received 15 years. I attended the sentencing. I needed to see that final moment of justice. When the judge pronounced the sentence, Harper looked at me from the defense table. I searched her face for some sign of genuine remorse, but I only saw resentment and self-pity. After the trial, Patty convinced me to sell my apartment. It had too many dark memories, too many shadows. I bought a smaller but brighter place in a different neighborhood, a new beginning in every sense. I resumed old hobbies I had abandoned. I joined a book club at the local library. I started taking painting classes. I met other women my age who became true friends, the kind of friends I had been too busy raising Harper to cultivate before. I updated my will once more. Patty would receive half of everything. The rest would go to the Shelter for Battered Women and an organization that helped elderly victims of family abuse. Arthur would have been proud. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from Harper from prison. I held it in my hands for days without opening it. Finally, one rainy afternoon, I opened it and read her words. It was more of the same. Justifications, projected guilt, empty promises of change. I tore it into small pieces and threw it in the trash. Some bonds, once broken so violently, cannot and should not be repaired. I spent too many years of my life trying to earn the love of someone incapable of giving it. I was no longer that woman. I was no longer the desperate mother begging for crumbs of affection. I was Eleanor Robinson, a survivor, a woman who had looked death in the eyes and had chosen to live, a woman who had lost her only daughter but had found her own strength. In the quiet nights in my new apartment, sometimes I thought about those 10 minutes, the 10 minutes that would have been all I had left of life if I hadn't forgotten my phone, if I hadn't returned at the exact moment, if I hadn't heard that conversation. But I didn't think of them with terror. I thought of them with gratitude, because those 10 minutes had given me a second chance, a chance to live the rest of my life on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me, free from the weight of a toxic love that almost destroyed me. And that, I discovered, was more valuable than any inheritance, any family bond, anything Harper could have taken from me. I survived, and in surviving, I finally learned to live.